Good evening. Welcome back to the Small Hours Podcast. I am Russell Cordell Staker. It is the evening of the 23rd of January, 2021, and I'm coming to you from Lakeway, Texas, outside of Austin, Texas. Tonight's episode, the 8th, since I've started this podcast, is what I'm going to call a consideration. I am going to read a brief essay by a writer by the name of Seymour Krim, and I'm titling this episode "A Decent Patriot." I'm going to read an essay that he wrote, and which was published in a couple of different areas. The essay is titled "For My Brothers and Sisters in the Failure Business," and after I read the essay, I'm going to begin my consideration. As I'd mentioned at the end of last year, going into this next year, I will be reading essays that I'm writing, and I'm also going to be broadening my horizons in terms of certain things that I'm reading and discussing from a literary perspective, and the idea around some of the things that are, I guess, marinating in my mind based on the reading. So this is going to be a new foray into a different form within this podcast. And as I do with each of these, I just do this one-off. So it might be a little sloppy in some of my speaking. I'll do my best, but I just do one take. So you're going to hear some shuffling of papers. And like I said, I'm going to read from this essay that Seymour Krim wrote, which was published posthumously in 1997. I have a book called The Art of Personal Essay it was a consortium or a collaborative pulling together collective by the writer and critic Philip LePate. And this is a book that I read cover to cover. It's a very hefty book, a broad spectrum of essays from a huge swath of great writers. And I read this book between 2003 and 2006. And the particular essay, which I'm going to read tonight by the writer Seymour Krim, just really was powerful, and it stayed with me ever since. And I just serendipitously came back to this recently, and you'll see at the end of this, after I read it, where I'm going to take it and what the consideration of thought is. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into this. To give a little context before I start the essay, let me just tell you about Seymour Krim. He was an author, editor, and literary critic. He was born in 1922 and he died in 1989 at the age of 67 years. He was a lifelong New Yorker, and he was considered part of what is known as New Journalism, a movement that was very big in the 1960s and continues on in a lot of ways, and it really transcended or influenced how writing in the journalistic method is even done today. And in a very basic sense, what new journalism basically means is it's writing journalistically, so in real-time reporting, if you will, but with the bent and elegance of literary prose and style. Mr. Krim was a writer of very direct candor. I'm not familiar with his books per se. I have every intention of going back and reading them. He was not very prolific, but he wrote some amazing essays, and some of the books that I'm aware of were collections of some of the essays. He, as I'd mentioned, was a writer of great candor, and he happened to be a great follower and participant of the Beat generation, of which Jack Kerouac, who is a big influence on me and so many others, he was somebody that Mr. Krim deeply admired. And in fact, Seymour Krim wrote an introduction to Jack Kerouac's novel Desolation Angels in 1965 as a proclamation to Kerouac's place in American letters. As I'd mentioned, in 1997, Philip LePate selected the essay that I'm going to write and put it into this big anthology, published it, and the title, as I'd said, is called For My Brothers and Sisters in the Failure Business. Before I start to read it, I want to read a little anecdote that Seymour Krim wrote, which is actually, it's a footnote at the very beginning of the essay. He says, America to me was and is the dream of my life. I cannot separate my private self from it. I have become a pessimist because I live in a time so hard on people, including me, that I sometimes wish I hadn't been born into all this. Not only to spare me more bum trips, but to free me from my knowledge of other people's situations. I've never really learned how to live. I improvise and fuck up anyway. But through it all, I owe so unfathomably much of whatever I am to being American that I couldn't conceive of being alive in any other dress. It is what I want. Yes, I think the time must come soon if mankind is going to find life possible when this romance with country has to be junked for the sake of everyone else. This world is made up of individuals, what my friend at the liquor store, Vinny Perazzo, calls God's children, not separate governments. But until we become a state equal to everyone, I want to be a decent patriot. Maybe afterwards, too, on a smaller scale. That's all I've ever really wanted. I'm homesick for that sweet land of liberty, and not only for the pursuit of happiness, but the fulfillment of it. Not to die for my country, I've already done it too often, but to live for it. Oh, I'll tell you, I'll make a mean mother of a patriot. I want America to know this kid was here. SK. That is where I'm deriving the title of this podcast, A Decent Patriot. So I wanted to share that, and I really loved his insight there. So without much further ado, what I would like to do is read the essay. It's just a few short pages, and then I will begin the consideration of various things that I've pulled in that were jogged as I reread this essay again. I've read it a few times over the last decade. I haven't read it for a few years, and I just serendipitously came to it not too long ago, and I was like, wow. And that's the impetus for tonight's episode. For My Brothers and Sisters in the Failure Business by Seymour Krim. We are all victims of the imagination in this country. The American dream may sometimes seem like a dirty joke these days, but it was internalized long ago by our fevered little minds, and it remains to haunt us as we fumble with the unglamorous pennies of life during the illusionless middle years. At 51, believe it or not, or believe it and pity me if you are young and swift, I don't know truly what I want to be. I've published several serious books. I rate an inch in who's who in America. I teach at a so-called respected university. But in that profuse upstairs delicatessen of mine, I'm as open to every wild possibility as I was at 13, although even I know that the chances of acting them out diminish with each heartbeat. One life was never quite enough for what I had in mind. At 50, my father was as built in as a concrete foundation, and at 55 was crushed out of existence by the superstructure of his life. I have no superstructure except possibly in my head. I literally live alone with my fierce dreams, and my possessions are few. My father knew where he stood, or thought he did, having originally come from one Iron Cross Europe. But I only know that I stand on today with a silent prayer that tomorrow will bring to me my revelation and miracleize me. That's because I come from America, which has to be the classic, ultimate, then they broke the mold incubator of not knowing who you are until you find out. I've never really found out, and I expect what remains of my life to be one long search party for the final me. I don't kid myself that I'm alone in this, hardly, and I don't think that the great day will ever come when I hold a finished me in my fist and say, here you are, congratulations. I'm talking primarily about the expression of that me in the world, the shape it takes, the profile it zings out, the work it does. You may sometimes think everyone lives in the crotch of the pleasure principle these days except you, but you have company, friend. I live under the same pressures you do. It is still your work or role that finally gives you your definition in our society. And the thousands upon thousands of people who I believe are like me are those who have never found the professional skin to fit the riot in their souls. Many never will. I think what I have to say here will speak for some of their secret life, and for that other sad America you don't hear too much about. This isn't presumption so much as a voice of scars and stars talking. I've lived it and will probably go on living it until they take away my hot dog. Consider, as the noble Dickens used to say about just such a lad as I, a boy at the turn of the 30s, growing up in his land without parents, discipline, any religion to speak of, yet with a famished need that almost unconsciously filled the vacuum where the solid family heart should be, the dizzying spectacle of his senses. America was my carnival at an earlier age than most, and I wanted to be everything in it that turned me on, like a youth bouncing around crazed on a boardwalk. I mean, literally everything. I was as unanchored a kid as you could conceive of, an open fuse box of blind yearning. And out of what I now assume was unimaginable loneliness and hunger, human hunger, I greedily tried on the personalities of every type on the national scene, as picked up through newspapers, magazines, movies, radio, and just nosing around. And what a juicy parade through any inexperienced and wildly applauding mind America was then. What a nonstop variety show of heroes, adventurers, fabulous kinds of human beings to hook onto you if you were totally on your own without any guidance and looking for your star in a society that almost drove you batty with desire. In my earnest role-playing, the philosophical tramp and the cool millionaire playboy were second nature to me, as were the style and stance of ballplayers, barnstorming pilots, polar explorers, radio personalities. How can I ever forget you, gorgeous-voiced Ted Husing? Generals, bridge-building engineers, treasure hunters, crooners, inventors. I wanted to be and actually was Glenn Cunningham, Joey Penner, Kid Chocolate, Chandu the Magician, Eugene O'Neill, a gangbuster. If you're old enough, tick off the names of the rotogravure big shots of the time and see Seymour impersonating them in his private magic theater. And later on, when I had lost my adolescent shame and knew myself to be a freak of the imagination, even wallowed in it, I identified with women like Amelia Earhart and even the hot, ripe, early pinup girl Iris Adrian, and transvestited my mind to see the world through their long lashes and tough lace. Democracy means democracy of the fantasy life, too. There are no cops crouching in the corridors of the brain. Dr. Freud's superego hasn't been able to pull its old country rank over here, even though it's tried like a mother, or should I say, a father? But my point is this: what a great fitting room for experimentation, a huge sci-fi lab for making the self you wanted. America was for those of us who needed models, forms, shapes we could throw ourselves into. Obviously, everyone from my generation didn't chuck caution out the window, even if they felt the lure, as I did, of a new make-your-own life-size man era. Some of my more realistic contemporaries narrowed it all down early and became the comparative successes they are today. Whether it's making a lot of money selling scrap in a junkyard, Ed Feinberg, or writing thrillers for connoisseurs of kinkiness, Patricia Highsmith, they all had to focus clearly, work hard. As traps and frustrations of 51 closed down around me, with all the small defects and petty hurts, and sometimes seemed to choke away all thoughts of the unique Homeric journey of the inner person in America, everyone's inner person, I salute them for achieving some of what they wanted. Nobody gets it all. But I salute anyone in this bewildering dreamland of a nation who has managed to cut through the wilderness of tangled trails to some definite cabin of achievement and reward. Yet those of us who have never really nailed it down, who have charged through life from enthusiasm to enthusiasm, from new project to new project, even from personality revolution to personality revolution, have a secret also. I'm sorry to say it isn't the kind that desperate people can use to improve themselves like those ads in the newspaper. Sadly enough, it is the kind that people in my 7-league but very leaky boots often take to psychiatrists, hoping to simplify their experience because they can't cope with the murderous tangle of it. But for those of us who have lived through each twist and turn, the psychiatry sessions, the occasional abyss, the endless review of our lives to see where we went wrong, and then come to see our natures as strange and special manifestations of a time and place that will never come again, there is a wonder in it that almost makes up for the beating we are beginning to take at the hands of the professional heavyweight world. Our secret is that we still have an epic longing to be more than what we are, to multiply ourselves, to integrate all the identities and action fantasies we have experienced. Above all, to keep experimenting with our lives all the way to Forest Lawn to see how much we can make real out of that prolific American dream machine within. Let me say it plainly. Our true projects have finally been ourselves. It's as if we had taken literally the odd cornball land of opportunity slogan and incorporated it into the pit of the being instead of the space around us. And fallen so much in love with the ongoing excitement of becoming, even the illusion of becoming, that our pants often fall down and reveal our dirty skivvies and skinny legs. The laughter hurts, believe me, but it doesn't stop us for very long. We were hooked early. What it comes down to is that the America of the pioneer has been made subjective by us. The endless rolling back of the frontier goes on within our heads all the time. We are the updated Daniel Boones of the American inner space. Each of our lives, for those of us in this country-wide fraternity, seems to us a novel or a play or a movie in itself, draining our energy, but then at other moments lifting us up to spectacular highs. Yet always moving, the big wagon train of great new possibilities always crushing on. The fact that all of this is private doesn't make it any less real. What it does do is make us ache with hopelessness at times as to how to find a vocation for this private super adventure serial out on the streets of life. I know for a fact that I wanted to become a novelist in my teens just so that I could be all these different personalities and events, that it was physically impossible for me to be any other way. As a matter of fact, I feel that the writing of the realistic romantic novel in America, and they were usually one and the same, with the hairy details just used to tack down the sweep of imagination, came out of these basic human needs to transcend the one body and temperament you were born with in order to mingle imaginatively with a cast of thousands that could only exist in a monster country like ours. Others wanted to become actors for much the same reason, to impersonate all the people they could not be. But in my case, I wanted to compose the script itself so that I could participate in the minds as well as the outward actions of the characters, who are all extensions of myself and my own mad love affair with the fabulous diversity of this society. I never accepted the discipline or finally the belief in a pure fiction separate from myself and never became the marvelous novelist of my teenage ambition. But I was an inward one, just as so many young kids today shoot movies in their heads with themselves as the leading character. I think it was just an accident of history that made me good at words instead of the sounds and pictures, which are the newest language, but I feel little superiority at being able to pitch a word or two compared to those like myself in other ways who are tongue-tied. What unites us all is that we never knew except in bits and pieces how to find a total expression, appreciated by our peers, in which we could deliver ourselves of all the huge and contradictory desires we felt within. The country was too rich and confusing for us to want to be one thing at the expense of another. We were the victims of our enormous appreciation of it all. Even though with words coming easily to me, I began in my 20s that long string of never totally satisfying jobs as Office of War Information, rewrite man, assistant pulp editor, motion picture publicity writer, motion picture script reader, book reviewer, finally editor of a magazine. I was always looking past them. When I heard a great black blues singer, I wanted to incorporate that sound in me, and even tried singing in Greenwich Village, which when I saw a handsome movie star close up. I thought that was my birthright also, and went to a plastic surgeon to try and make me look more like this example of male beauty. When I had saturated myself with the brilliant records of Lenny Bruce and Lord Buckley, I thought that I too should improvise in a nightclub and even played a small engagement in the Midwest to painfully act this dream out. Whatever I saw that was good in others and which I didn't possess, I tried literally to add to my nature, graft onto the living flesh. It seemed to me, and I'm sure to those like me who haven't yet spoken, that American society was essentially a launching pad for the endless development of the self. We cared more about trying to enlarge and extend the boundaries of being what we were, of demonically sucking all of the country's possibilities into ourselves, than we did about perfecting a single craft of profession. As I've said, it was a beautiful, breathless eagerness for all the life we could hold inside, packed layer on layer like a bulging quart container of ice cream. Granted, that, in a way, was the most rank kind of selfishness and self-absorption, yet this, too, was forecast and made part of the national inheritance in 1870, when Walt Whitman chanted, "One self I sing, a simple, separate person, yet utter the word democratic, the word in mass." That's what this democracy was for us, a huge supermarket of mass men, where we could take a piece here and a piece there to make our personalities for ourselves, instead of putting up with what was given at the beginning. But this lovely idea became for some of us a tragedy, or at least a terrible confusion that wasn't counted on at the beginning. When do you stop making a personality? When do you stop fantasizing an endless you and try to make it with what you've got? The answer is never, really. You keep adding and subtracting from that creation, which is yourself, until the last moment. Once begun, it is not a habit that can be given up easily. Some people who started off this risky life game with high hopes found that after a while they were unable to live with the self they began with, and unable to come close to the self or selves they desired to be. They live in pain, and some are no longer living at all, having found it too bitter to take. In my own case, because of the fluency of words, I was able to express my own longings and desires with personal statements in print as the years went by. And thus I wasn't as completely frustrated as those other dreamers. I know who have run the gamut of jobs and flings at movies, writing, dancing, politics, and yet have never found a home to match their imaginations. Simply put, they never found a form to contain them, or have only caught it momentarily, and then it was gone. During my 20s and 30s, and even into my 40s, it was exhilarating to learn and be involved at this. And then that steaming source, the partisan review brigade of radical intellectuals, then the Beat Generation, then a wonderful fling at daily newspaper reporting on the New York Herald Tribune, then the breakthrough, to my mind, of the new journalism. I was confident, as are all American nomads of the jeweled highways of the imagination, that there would be a sudden confluence of all the roads at some fated point, and then I would put it all together with a gorgeous thunderclap. No soap. Actually, all of this can conceivably happen, but the mathematics are against you as time goes on. Yet time is just that factor we don't want to hear about until it elbows us in the nose. We know all along that time is squeezing us into a corner while we mentally rocket to each new star that flares across our sky, and yet we can't help ourselves. We forget that our contemporaries are building up wealth of one kind or another, reputations, consistency, credit in the world, and that it counts for more as age settles down around all of us, the very age we have denied or ignored. In a way, those of us who have lived higher in the mind than on the sidewalk, making and revising our salad of possibilities, have stayed younger than we should have. We have even been sealed off from our own image as it's seen by others. Yet each one of us, sooner or later, gets the elbow that reminds us that the real world we have postponed making a deal with, in fact played with like Charlie Chaplin kicking the globe around in The Great Dictator, has been evaluating us with a different set of standards than the ones we have been applying to ourselves. If we have been snotty towards ordinary success, proud and mysterious as we followed the inner light, even making thoughtless cracks about those who settle for little, then the day always comes when our own inability to put it all together is seen by another who wants to cut us down to size, and our lives suddenly explode in our faces. I was living in Europe at the time, where the attitude towards personal success and failure is much less of a real distinction than over here because of the even-handed wounds of recent history. Everyone was badly hurt by the war. Even today, one man or woman's fate counts for less than some kind of minimum well-being for masses of people who are trapped by political and economic circumstances beyond their control and must learn to live cheerfully if possible, without hope for large personal triumphs. It is a relief for Americans who come from a society that glorifies individual achievement to the aching and breaking point to live over there for a while and try to recuperate from the American heat in a different psychological climate. In fact, many of our permanent expatriates are just the kind of people I've been talking about all through this communication. A band who have never found themselves by our official standards, and perhaps never will, but who can live more at peace beyond our shores, with less money and less strain than at home. I too had been unkinked in this easier, we're all fucked together, so let's make it the best of it environment, self-lulled into thinking. I was as rich in potential a human gold mine as I always believed. As all of us in my camp want to believe, when the dirty American word failure winged its way across the water and hit me where it hurts. It suddenly and brutally defined to me the price I had paid for my bid to be everything that proposed itself to my imagination. Maybe I never had a choice and would have been an uncertain performer at whatever I did, but my decision to aim at the stars had been a conscious one. And this was the way it was being weighed on the common man's do it or shut up scale. But if you're a proud searching failure in this society, and we can take ironic comfort in the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of us, then it is smart and honorable to know what you attempted and why you are now vulnerable to the body blows of those who once saw you robed in the glow of your vision, and now only see an unmade bed with a few unwashed cups on the bare wooden table of a gray day. What we usually refuse to acknowledge in our increasingly defensive posture is that we chose our royal inner trip out of an excess of blind faith, out of a reach beyond what we might have had if our desires had been less grandiose. I can't really criticize this. I think it is inherent in the American mystique to want to go all the way to the limit of your imagination. But if we are straight about it, we must accept that we are in large part responsible for the jam we are now in. In my own situation, I know only too well that from childhood and adolescence on, I clutched at the habit of dreaming up a glittering future, always, instead of putting my head down and slugging my way through the present. I must confess that in an almost reflexive sense, I still find myself doing this childish number, as do so many of those other poor lovely romantics who are like me. It's a primitive method so native to us by now that it is a part of us. What was once a psychological choice when we were young, in other words, has now become for many of us a habit as hard to kick as junk. The handy magic of relying on the future, on tomorrow, to knit together all the parts of a self that we hoarded up for a lifetime can't be stopped at this late date, or won't be stopped, because our frame of mind was always that of a long odds gambler. One day it would all pay off, but for most of us, I'm afraid that day will never come. The original hopes, their extravagant range and spaciousness, and yes, their lack of specific clarity and specific definition were beyond translation into deed. They dramatized our lives for a good long while and then turned slightly sour when people began to ask for proof. For a minority, and I still believe this, the special form they seek to pull it all together will unexpectedly click into place after years of turning the key this way and that. And as for myself, I'm lucky, I guess, in that I can write about this very phenomenon that I live, while others who experience it just as toughly, maybe even more so, are without the words to tell you what they have gone through. Maybe that is my revelation, the final me. My purpose in this schemelessness of things after looking so strenuously in all directions and being so discontented with what I apparently do without strain. But this is a poor second to what I wanted, and I will never be satisfied with sketching my own portrait and that of those like me when it was action we finally craved, after all those dress rehearsals in the mind and not self-analysis. America worked on us too hard, when you get right down to it. We imaginatively lived out all the mythic possibilities, all the personal turn-on of practically superhuman accomplishment, stimulated by the fables of the media. We were the perfect big-eyed consumers of this country's four-color ad to the universe, wanting to be one tempting thing and then another, and ending up, most of us, with little but sadly smiling hope that time would somehow solve our situation. When I've been brave, I've told my friends who share my plight that this is no longer a true possibility to hang on to. Time will most likely repeat itself. We will most likely repeat ourselves. Most of my friends agree with that hard twinkle in the eye that unites all of us who have earned it. But you cannot separate us from the deepest promise of the country, as it was lived within by very sensitive poets, without a tongue, so to speak, and perhaps the ultimate failure of the country. This last is not an easy thing to say, even in a time in which America baiting is the rage. Like most of us in the failure business, we are, patriots, so outrageously old-fashioned that we incorporated the spirit of the country in our very heads, took literally its every invitation to the greatest kind of self-fulfillment ever known. There's something beautiful about being an American sucker, even if you pay for it with tears and worse. We were millionaires of the spirit for at least 20 adult years before we felt the lowering of the boom. And in the last analysis, it is the spirit, the attitude within, a quality of soul that this country has to offer to history much more than its tangible steel and the bright blood, too often, accompanying it. That's the end of the essay by Seymour Krim. If you've listened, and I certainly hope you have, and I would even encourage you may want to stop and go back and listen to it again and get your hands on this essay as well. It's remarkably powerful. It's interesting. When I read it the first time, I was 31 years old. I am 46. I'm going to be 47 in May. And like anything, I was thinking about Bruce Springsteen. He said one time that something well written stays written, and I've said it poorly, but that's basically the paraphrase. That when something is very well thought out and put on a page, or recorded in a studio in a song, or painted on a canvas, those things remain. And as we age, as we go through the experience of our own lives, and we come to those pieces of art, those expressions that are deeply human, that we can not only relate to, but have struck a chord within us when we've seen them or participated with them for the first time, and then we come back to them with the added depth of the experience that we have, that tuning fork inside of us, it resonates all the stronger. And this particular essay, I remember, and I'm going to read actually what I wrote in the margin at the very end of the essay as I get to the end of my consideration. I have a note to do that. But what I will say is I was on a flight and I was so emotionally struck. I remember tears welling up in my eyes because at that particular juncture, for me, Seymour Krim had offered the keynote for what I already understood about life. It's ironic and also kind of silly to say that because at the time I was only 31 and I'm 46 now, and I look at where I was at then and I think, oh, you're quite silly, Russell. You didn't fully understand what you understand now. And as I'm saying it right now, I know if I read this essay 15, 20 years from now, it'll be added unto that and on and on. And I think if there is a magic button in life, I have to think that wherever we cross over to when this thing is over, that's probably how we're going to look back on it. And thank God for writers who can sit down and put these thoughts on the page and speak so directly and openly about those things that a lot of times we don't want to talk about. And Seymour Krim certainly did there. So this is the consideration, and this was the point of departure, and why it was I felt strongly in reading this. I'm working on an essay right now that I'm going to be producing here shortly, hoping to have out soon. I'd like to say I'm going to have it in the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to be offering essays as I go forward, and I'm going to be doing some various readings, but it's going to be really focused on the literature that I'm taking in as I'm working on my own novels and whatever. This particular essay I felt so strongly in considering because of what I'm about to say now. So I want to unpack a few things here, and then I started to pull in some other thoughts that came really clearly to me as I read this. Let me get a quick drink here. At the very beginning of the essay, or towards the beginning, Mr. Krim talks about I think the penultimate question that we all ask ourselves on a regular basis, and that is what I want to be. And what I like is that I think that's a question we should and probably do ask ourselves all the time, even as we get older. I think it's as appropriate to ask that question at the age of 50 as it is at the age of 16. And I would like to believe that as you get into, if we're lucky to live into our 80s and 90s, I think it's okay to ask that question as well. And he definitely positions that in a rhetorical way. And then states that it's not about, not knowing who you are until you find out. And, the other day, I've been reading a lot of Albert Camus right now. I read The Stranger, and I'm right in the middle of The Plague right now. And I'm going to actually touch on some of that in this essay that I'm working on presently. But I will say one thing about the idea with Camus as a writer is, I believe he said that life is absurd. And, that's kind of a startling thing to hear, but it's actually quite true. And I agree with him. There is so much about life that is so utterly bizarre and absurd that I think that if there is a purpose to this life, and taking any kind of religious context out of this, because I just don't think religion comes anywhere close to even offering a truthful answer here, then I think what it really is that we just don't know until we get to the very end of it and we get this backward glimpse and go, oh, okay, that's what it was. And Seymour Krim touches on that. The definition in our society, as he'd mentioned, is too heavily weighted on the role that we have, the title of our position, the amount of money in our bank account, the work that we do. And as I've gone on in my life, I've gone through such a diminishment of some of those things that it's very easy to feel less of a man because the world is so weighted in stating that that's really where our importance is. And those things are so surface. And we all know that. I think every human being understands that. But how often do we really genuinely consider the depth of that truth? Seymour Krim mentioned, he talked about they never found the professional skin to fit the riot in their souls. And that's very telling. I was thinking about the song by Bob Dylan from his 1973 album, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, Knocking on Heaven's Door. Guns N' Roses covered it, a bunch of people have, but the version Bob Dylan, his original, is the best. His voice is just perfect. But there are a couple of phrases within that very spare song that I think really ring strongly. And it's a song I've been listening to a lot lately. Mama, take this badge from me. I can't use it anymore. It's getting dark, too dark to see. that cold black cloud is coming down. And I think that's probably what this life is that cold black cloud is coming down. And yet even in those moments of just feeling like, man, what's my worth here? That sunrise is still there. The light breaks through, and we carry on. It's an American positivity that we carry as Americans that I think we just keep getting up and we take on more. And I'm not saying that that's not possible in any other land, but it's very intrinsic in the idea of the American dream and what it means to be American. And it's something I love about America, but it's also kind of borders on a little bit of idiocy too sometimes, because life can just be so overbearing in what it's trying to say to us as we go through those things. America is the carnival. I was thinking back a few years back, my wife and I went with her family to a carnival in Houston. And it was really interesting to just observe the carnival barkers as they would hearken over to you to try to get you to come and participate in what they were doing. The whole tactic of a carnival barker is obviously to get your attention, and they will do it in the most ugly way. It's loud. It's disrespectful. Also, it's a caterwauling and it's a cat call. And, my wife is a beautiful woman, and I remember we were by this game, whatever, and this guy had this kind of a scowl on his face as he looked at me, and then he saw my wife and wanted our attention. And I got the sense that he was baiting me a little bit. And the feeling that I had as I walked away, I actually didn't acknowledge him, and then he persisted. And I finally turned around and I just gave him a smile, a nice smile. I wasn't trying to be off-putting, but it was a smile of like, I heard you, I'm acknowledging you, but we're not going to stop here. And the facial expression he had was very, very ugly. And I remember feeling pity in my heart. And I don't say that in a way to say that I was above him. I felt pity because I thought, I'm no different than this guy. And if I was in his shoes, I'd probably, and I saw a couple like I'm seeing right now, and I was in this situation in the American carnival of this life that I was living, I would probably have a bit of animosity, maybe anger. And I felt pity because I understood that. And I also understood because in my own life, there have been moments where I've felt like I'm a carnival barker. I've spent most of my life in the working world in sales. And selling to me, I'm good at that, but I also recognize there's a charade that's being played. And it goes with this idea that Seymour Krim touched on in this, it's almost like a Homeric homecoming. I got thinking about the Odyssey by Homer, which I studied extensively when I was an English literature major. And then I read a couple of times after, and, to be frankly honest, I don't particularly care for that book. I read it because I knew it was important. It's 8th century before Christ literature, and it's a great epic Greek story. And, the idea of an epic poem that, is talking about Odysseus, the king of Ithaca. He's making his awkward and triumphant journey home from the Trojan War. It's got this sound that is very American. And I think maybe I was drawn to that because that's kind of the American story. But what's interesting about Homer, and this ties back to this carnival barker idea, is that it really isn't until Poseidon wrecks Odysseus's ship that he begins to actually tell his story. And this goes back to what Seymour Krim was talking about in the failure business. I think that we probably, in our own minds, are going to be better storytellers. We don't think that at the time, but we don't become the better storytellers until we've been shipwrecked. And that's what makes the story of Homer, or of Odysseus, so powerful, because when he realizes that he's stranded and he's got to get back home, then he's able to start to regale the context of that story. And that brought full circle what I experienced when I was at the carnival in Houston. And as I was reading Seymour Krim again, it came full circle in that way as well. The prolific American dream machine that he talks about, which is this fascination of a myth that I think we as Americans hold to, is one side and probably the bigger of the two sides of who we are. But he points out very directly that our true projects have finally, in his words, ultimately been ourselves. It's the illusion of becoming. And I thought back, I'm a big fan of Stephen King. I've been reading him since I was a boy, and I continue to read Stephen King. He's a master storyteller. And one of my favorite novellas was the story called The Body. It was published in a collection of stories in 1982 in a book called Different Seasons. And it was later published on its own after The Body became an adapted film by the director Rob Reiner in 1986. That movie came out when I was 12, by the way, and it remains one of my favorite movies, but it's called Stand By Me. And there's a particular scene that came to my mind as I was reading this again that I just love. It's the campfire scene where the four boys who are going to see this dead body by the railroad tracks, they snuck out of their homes and they told their parents they're going to be camping out in each other's backyards. But in fact, they're going out on this search for this boy, Ray Brower, who's been killed by a train. And they're on the night of their camp out, they're sitting around the campfire talking about things like cherry-flavored Pez and how big Annette's tits on the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse have gotten, just true boy conversation. And Gordy says something. He says, Wagon Train is a really cool show, but did you ever notice that they never really get anywhere? They just keep wagon training. And man, talk about a metaphor for America. I just feel like that's kind of how we are. I can only speak for myself. I know, of course, that we always have the rags to riches stories. We love to gravitate towards those because this is the magic land where anything is possible. But in America today, it feels less and less so. And I think more now than ever, the idea of the American dream probably is like Gordy's truth in understanding that Wagon Train was really just a story about wagon training. And maybe being an American is just about being an American. The destination is the myth. It's just that we're on this track of survival as best as we can get it, but we also have a healthy dose of this just magical optimism. And I think maybe blind faith sometimes that overrides the logic that I think a lot of people in the rest of the world look at and maybe admire in one hand, and then in the other think these Americans are a little bit off their rocker. He talks about wanting to be a novelist in his teens, and this was something that I particularly related to because I have been the exact same way. To know, as he did, that he was going to write these great books, these books that were going to add to the landscape of the American arts and letters. And yet Seymour Krim, in his life, never really was known and didn't become this great novelist. And he says as much in the essay that he never became the marvelous novelist, but in his words, I was an inward one. And yet through all of that, in the life that he was living, he went through this long string of obligations and jobs, as we do, as I understand in my own life. And like I said, I'm in my late 40s, well, middle 40s. I still haven't published a word yet. I have a novel that I thought I was going to have done right around Christmas. It's still not done. I'm getting closer. I've, started writing essays, but I've had these grandiose ideas of what I'm going to be as a writer. And as time has gone on, I don't think in terms of the grandiosity anymore. It's just about the work. But it took me so damn long to get over that hump. And, for instance, when Seymour Krim talks about, he says, when I heard a great black blues singer, and I wanted to incorporate that sound in me too. I do that all the time. I could be at a Pearl Jam concert and Eddie Vedder, could say something at the mic after a song. Now, it doesn't even have to be the song. He's holding a bottle of red wine, which he's wont to do in concert. And I always love that about him. In between songs, he'll lift up a bottle of red and take a sip out of it. And just the way he holds himself, I think I'm going to incorporate that into my own man self. There's something artistic in how he shares his voice that I'm going to do. And I'm just using this as one example. And Seymour Krim was talking about that. American society, it truly is this launching pad for this endless development of the self that he talks about. And instead of putting up with what it was that we were given at the very beginning, as he talked about, we're always searching for the other self that we may in fact never be. And wouldn't it be nice if we got to a point, as he suggested in his essay, that maybe it's okay to just say what I came with in the beginning is who I am. So, in being the novelist, as he described it, he actually became a great writer. He wrote an essay that in my mind transcends a great many full-length novels that I've read. he's dead and gone, but that essay alone, this essay that I've just read, has meant more to me than some of the great, magnum opuses that, we're told to read as we come up in philosophy and literature and whatever. His influence was just as powerful. And I think he understood that, and he was expressing that maybe he failed in what his idea was, but he succeeded without fully knowing how he had succeeded. Sometimes I don't think we recognize the size of the wake that we make, so to speak, as if we're boats going through choppy water. What he had and what I relate to is a fluency with words, putting it all together, as he said, with a gorgeous thunderclap. But the mathematics are against you as time goes on. Must learn to live cheerfully, if possible, without much hope for large personal triumphs. All Seymour Krim's words, but these were things that I pulled from. In 1991, I was downtown in Denver. I went to high school in Cherry Creek High School in Inglewood, Colorado. And I was downtown. I was participating in a service program for a couple of weeks where I went downtown and I lived in an apartment with a couple of other guys. We were doing just community service kind of stuff. And the day that I went down to meet up with the two guys that I was going to be with in this service project, they were going to meet me at the bus station in Denver. And I don't remember if it was the central station where the railroad is. All I know is downtown Denver. This was 1991. I lived in the suburbs in South Denver off I-25. So to go down to downtown Denver, which sounds totally silly now, but it was a really big deal. And I'll never forget, my dad dropped me off at the bus station and I had a little duffel bag and I went into the main entryway. And in my memory, the station opened up very broad from the street once you're on the inside. And then it went down like several floors, but it was this big, grand, open, like bus, train, whatever, beautiful kind of grand hall. And I just remember taking a deep breath and I looked around. It wasn't all that crowded, but, it was busy. And way, way down at the bottom of the floor was a black woman with a couple of bags. And in my memory, I think she had a little child with her. But what really stands out was the look on her face. It was a look of despondency. She was standing by a post, obviously waiting for a bus or some form of transportation. Like I said, I'm probably melding memory here. Maybe it was a tram or a train. It seems like it was kind of a gathering place of various points of transit, but she was standing waiting, and the look on her face was completely withdrawn. She was there, the lights were on in her eyes, but she had a look of just despair. She was despondent. And, in 1991, I was 17. Was I 16? No, I would have been 17. Just completely full of all the piss and vinegar of a, young kid who's got the world by the balls. And, I was going to be the next president of the United States, and still possibility that I might play baseball and, all the wild dreams that a kid has that, it's not even logical, the stuff that we think of. But as I looked at this woman's face, it was foreign to me because the thought that I had was, why does she look so dour? And what a stupid thing for me to even think. And it stuck with me all these years. And I was thinking about that. It came out of nowhere. And I remember that feeling of a difference that I had. Obviously, I wasn't black, I wasn't a woman, and I also wasn't middle-aged as she was. So, there were some obvious things that I could see just based on what I'm looking at. But it's the interior that matters. I didn't have an understanding or a sense of perspective for not only my own personal history and the context with which I entered that bus station, but to even try in that moment to even portray in an imaginative state what her day or that moment might have been like. And maybe nothing at all had gone on. Maybe she was delightfully successful and happy. But in that particular moment, as we all find out when we get older, life is just a big shit sandwich a lot of times. And maybe she was just having one of those moments and it was really portrayed on her face. And I bring that up because it's this idea that Seymour Krim was talking about, this fluency of words, that the language that we get that comes to us, I don't think the words really count until we've experienced enough of life that we can back that up. And that's where fluency actually happens. And now as I look at that woman, I see her so differently. And what I see is that I could have been just as much her as she was me. It's kind of a Walt Whitman kind of perspective, but what it does is it's the idea that I can diminish myself entirely, where my viewpoints don't matter, but what did matter and what should matter were hers. That I should have been more concerned about the fact that there is this woman that I had noticed, and what I saw in her was a bleak outlook, and there were reasons for that, and I think it's my job as a human being to understand why, because it might make me a better, more perceptive human being. And certainly in the writing aspect of being a writer like I am now, I wish that I had imagined more what might have been going on in her mind. Would it have changed the world? No. But it's something that would have given me greater depth, and I certainly would have exercised a greater sense of my own humanity, which I chose not to in that moment of just youthful blindness. From the bus station, I think about what Seymour Krim talked about in his decision to aim for the stars. That was always a conscious choice for him, even though he knew he wasn't going to ultimately be what he thought he was going to be. And goes back to that excess of blind faith out of reaching beyond for what we might have thought. And yet, sometimes those grandiose pursuits, they blind us to what we should probably pay attention to. As I'm coming to a conclusion with this essay and why it's important to me, I was reminded of a writer that's very near and dear to me. In my essay, English major, I talk about just briefly the writer James Thurber, and I didn't ever circle back on what I wanted to say about that, and this is my moment to do that. James Thurber was an incredibly gifted writer, and I've got a note here because I wanted to touch on something about James Thurber, but he wrote the book The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and several others. There was another book he wrote called My Life in Hard Times. Ben Stiller adapted The Secret Life of Walter Mitty in 2013 into an incredibly good motion picture. And I want to just touch on this briefly. James Thurber's work, he wrote this short story, which is what this film was adapted from, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. It was a short story that appeared in the New Yorker in 1939, and then was later collected into his book, My World and Welcome to It. And I think that book was published maybe 10 years after. I'm not quite sure, but I remember I read that in college when I was at Brigham Young, and it really, really spoke to me. And maybe at a subconscious level, I was already being prepared for the fact that I was on my way to living a life like The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And that awareness probably, and this has been true for my entire reading life, I find in a really, really special way, it's almost like I'm guided, but I'm guided to certain things that I need to read, as if there are strange angels on my shoulders on the literary halls of the great expanse of time and eternity that say, okay, Russell, you may not understand all of this, but this is something you're going to read now because you're going to need this. And this was one of those things where just the very direct deadpan prose and the humor of James Thurber painted the picture that I needed to prepare me for the harder things that are going to come in life and the realities that I've had to face. And it's not to say that I have a wonderful life. I'm not saying that, but waking up day in and day out, as we all do, this is just how it is. There are things about our life that don't meet the expectation of the grandiosity that we've created for ourselves when we're young and dumb and full of all these mythological passions that don't really add up to the hard work of just keeping your head down and doing what you need to do to get there. Yes, there are success stories, people that go on to be these incredibly talented and great people in whatever they choose to do. I turned out to be, I was like a journeyman from the start, where I was good at a lot of things, but not good enough at really any one thing, not because I wasn't capable of it, but because I was so scattered in my life of wanting to be all of these things, which Seymour Krim talks about and which James Thurber writes about. And this leads me now to 2013. So when Ben Stiller adapted that book, which I'd read in college in 1996, so now we fast forward to 2013, I'm working for a software company in a consulting sales position, and I was miserable. I had a cube and I was managing a team. So I was actually in a manager position, which on the surface, it sounds great. The pay was all right. I was doing okay. And, on paper, I should have been ecstatic, but inside it was like having a big hole in the middle of my heart because the work was meaningless to me. And on top of that, the way we were going about selling it was meaningless, and all the rah-rah that went with it. And I'm sitting at my desk, and I clicked on YouTube, and I found the trailer for this new movie that was coming out that Christmas. And this would have been like in early October. I remember seeing the trailer in 2013. It came out at Christmas of 2013. If you get a chance, go to YouTube. If there is a Hall of Fame of Academy Awards for trailers, I think the trailer, and I know there's multiple versions, but the official trailer number one, I think, but there's a couple out there on YouTube for Ben Stiller's film, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, it should win every award, because to me, it was soul searching. And within like 2-3 minutes, I got everything I needed. But it was like a gift from heaven, because it spoke so powerfully to me. And let me just set the stage here for you on this, which is really interesting. So the trailer opens with the song Dirty Paws by the group of Monsters and Men. And it's a perfect song for this gray-white kind of opening sequence and the way this unfolds. Ben Stiller is Walter Mitty, and a closet door opens up as the music is playing. It's this strumming of the guitar, and immediately I'm sitting up in my seat because I thought, I need to see this right now. And the closet door opens up, and there are a select few pressed dress shirts hanging up on the rack, a couple of pairs of slacks. And then the camera pans over to an above ceiling shot looking down on Ben Stiller as he's laying out his outfit for the day. And then you see the kitchen table where he lays out his cornflakes and his reading glasses, and he's got his checkbook, and he lays out his napkin a certain way, and he basically proceeds forth into another flat silver gray day of life. And he works at the magazine Life. And as you see him walk to work in his just very conventional, conservative, business attire, he goes into the office and he walks past all of these great magazine covers of Life magazine. And again, Ben Stiller took some liberty of James Thurber here. They kind of Hollywoodized certain things, but the context of the story is very much in the spirit of what James Thurber was writing about, that it's just this no man, basically, just an ordinary guy who going nowhere. He's got his day job, making just enough to get by. And he walks into the break room, and there is Kristen Wiig, who's beautiful, and he's trying to just catch a glimpse of her, but you can tell he's very shy, and he's probably never spoken to her, and he obviously has a deep, interest and affinity for her, but, she kind of looks over at him, but he pulls away because he doesn't want to be seen. And in that instant, he imagines himself as this handsome, tall, ice climber who breaks through the wall, and he boldly walks up to Kristen Wiig and smiles this smile, and she looks at him, and you can tell she's impressed, and she smiles back. And then the trailer goes on a little bit further, and the photographer for Life magazine, who's played by Sean Penn, there's a photograph of him up on a wall, and Ben Stiller's character Walter Mitty is looking at the wall with this picture of Sean Penn, and Sean Penn's photograph all of a sudden starts to move. And he takes his hand and kind of gives this come hither, mysterious motion, beckoning Walter Mitty to come out and basically live life. And as this music is playing, Ben Stiller does it. Walter Mitty steps forth, follows the motion, heeds the call, grabs his coat, goes forth, and the shot that just hit me square in the chest is it shows him on his way out of that office, and he's walking past this broad wall again of these beautiful laid out, full-length framed wall-size photographs of Life magazine with these, just amazing covers. And the very last cover, as he's walking past this, and you get in the frame, Walter Mitty, Ben Stiller's character, juxtaposed, he's walking out with his coat on and he's got his briefcase, is Walter Mitty, Ben Stiller, in the outfit of an astronaut with a helmet. And it's just perfect. It's beautiful. And he steps forward out of the office and immediately into this helicopter. And then on we go with the rest of the trailer. And there's a particular scene where this indigenous gentleman out in some far off land swaps like a leaf twig or something in the face of Walter Mitty. And at that moment, the song by Of Monsters and Men, you hear, "Hey," and it's the same thing. It just grabs a hold of you. And there I was in this office in October of 2013, and I'm doing my level best to hold back the tears because I felt in my heart the same way. And it reminded me then of me sitting on a plane when I was back in California several years before, a full decade before, and I'd read this essay for the very first time, and I had that same feeling. And I knew all along, and I've known since I was little, where I really wanted to be with my life. And yet, throughout all of this, I recognize that it has been impossibly hard to be just that. And I have to embrace the fact that I may yet never actually achieve what I've set out to do. But deep down inside, that fire is so hot and so free, and it's something still worth pursuing, even though it may not actually turn out the way I imagined it, much like what Seymour Krim talks about. And it's really powerful. And so with that, I'm going to conclude, because this is where it comes full circle and why I decided to share this. It's not about just coming back to me. I mean, obviously I'm the podcaster here, and I'm the writer, and I'm also the reader in this context, but it's a message for all of us. I want to be open in sharing something that I've decided. I've been doing a lot of different odd jobs, but I'm going to go ahead and get a trade skill education in addition to continuing to look for other work and jobs, because I've got to do that while I continue to write. And so I'm going to take a little program over the next few months to get my plumbing certification. And I thought it's fitting at this point in my life to be willing to continue to do things that I never imagined, obviously to take care of my family, to do what's necessary. I'm a highly educated, successful guy in my own way, but I also recognize the world's shifting, and I can't wait around. I have to keep doing. And I think the message to all of this is, much like in our lives, sometimes that adventure, it doesn't have to be this big fancy adventure. It's the adventure of saying, you know what, let's do something different. Let's shift gears here a little bit. And Seymour Krim talks about the various jobs that he had. Ultimately, it comes back to the fluency of language. And the success of my own life, and this has always been the case, has been that wherever I've gone, whatever I've been willing to do and try, has brought other abundance that I didn't see, not just an equation of what the money might be or an opportunity, but by being willing to add myself into a broader sense of my own human experience and offer service and value in different ways. I get language as a result of that, which will further me along in my own work. Now, this isn't to say that's what this is about. The reason why I brought that up is the idea is to be a craftsman. And this is also why I titled this little consideration, A Decent Patriot. And what I believe Seymour Krim was probably reaching for when he talked about that is that sometimes in life we have to be willing to journey out beyond what we think we're capable of, to put the dreams still in the front end of where we're headed, but at the same time to recognize that to get there, it may mean we have to take multiple paths to try something different. And a decent patriot is being, already a person of who he is or who she is, always was, and may yet never fully become, but for whom, in spite of whatever failures and successes, by getting up each day and continuing on anyway, I think that's the idea of the American dream. And I've had to reset my own sense of what the American dream means to me, which ironically, I still believe could be just as much as what I imagined, but I've had to shift what that idea is. And I think in that sense, it emboldens me to continue on and try something new. I want to close out by reading what I actually wrote at the very end of the essay. So I wrote this on the airplane. This is just a little tiny little note. And I read this. This is on April 24, 2006. And this is what I said. I have read a great many wonderful things in my 31 years. So I was 31 at that time. I'm 46 now. But this essay, without a doubt, stands as something both poignant and personally profound to me. I'm grateful to Seymour Krim for having written it. I needed to read this today whilst flying from Los Angeles to Wilmington, North Carolina, April 24, 2006. Russell Cordell Staker. And what's interesting is when I was reading that, I was an oncology hospital rep with a really high-profile company. And it's just so ironic because I was on a path that I thought was leading to this whole other thing, and I was already getting a sense that things are going to get even more interesting as life goes on. And what an adventure it truly is. I'm grateful for the experience of my life, and truly amazed every time I read something that speaks to my soul, much like Seymour Krim's essay, that reminds me that I think the nature of this game, the American dream and the worldwide dream for all human beings, is to just be our best selves and not be afraid to just keep slugging. Keep the dreams that you got, pursue them, work towards them, but don't be afraid to also mix it up. And, there are times in life where we have to do things we probably didn't think we needed to do, but just do them anyway. It's worth it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. It's getting late. I'm excited for the coming year, and I've got several essays that I'm working on. The book is coming, and I've got some plans to get started on my second novel as well. I'm not going to say much more about that, but I'm still making progress, and just took some time off to be with the family. And obviously with the pandemic and everything's just been upside down, but we're doing our best, and tomorrow's a new day. So keep safe, everybody. Hang in there. Keep your masks on. Treat each other well. Doesn't matter what your political stripe is. Just remember, we're all Americans. And for those of you who aren't American, you're as American as we are, in the sense that we're brothers and sisters. And as Seymour Krim would say, I think we are all brothers and sisters in failure, which means we're great successes. So hang in there. I wish you well. God bless. And until the next episode of These Small Hours, good night.